All right. Greetings, everyone, to a brand new episode of The Critics. And whether you're joining us live or joining us from the replay, welcome. My name is Vinay Raman, and I'm your guide and your host on this journey through this episode. Today's episode is titled Maximize Employee Performance Through Culture, Recruiting, and Retention. I'm actually really pretty excited about this. I've got two really special guests here today who I think are going to give you a lot of good insights and nuggets of information. To kick things off, I want you to interact with us. You'll see, usually on the right-hand side of your screen, a comment section. If you're watching us live, I'd love for you to type into that comment box right now. Type in pound live. If you're watching the replay, use pound replay. The reason I ask you to do this, type in pound live or pound replay, is because that understanding of who's coming in and when helps us significantly shape what topics we use in future episodes. So I also want to start out with a question to get everyone warmed up a little bit here. And it's kind of a bigger question. And it is, have you ever wondered what obstacles stand in your way of becoming a top tier leader? Well, I'll tell you, that question has intrigued me. It's taken me a long time to try to see if I could figure out the answer to that and get closer to the answer. And this podcast encapsulates some of the insights I've gained over time in my history and my professional experience while trying to find that answer. And I've got a panel of experts here who also specialize in that area. But before we kind of really delve into the depths of this, I want to break a little bit of the ice here, and I want to get a little bit of your perspective on this. In the comments again, I'd like to ask you, how many of you, if you had this magic wand, wish you could magically transform into a more effective leader with just kind of the wave of the wand or the snap of your fingers? Tell me in the comments, is that a Y for yes or a N for no? Have you ever wondered if you could make it that easy? Type a Y or an N in the comments. That's what we're going to do today, is we're going to unpack that question a little bit and see if we can understand the various facets of how you can evolve into that better leader who specializes in those areas. So let's get rolling with a couple of ground rules and some introductions. Get engaged, ask us questions. I've been doing that up till now. Please type those into the comments. I'd like to also hear where you're from. We've got people who join us from all over the world, and I would love my panel to see how many people are joining and where they're listening in from. If you're here in the United States, that's great. Tell us, I'm in Colorado in the United States, or I'm in Canada, wherever you're connecting from. I'd love to hear where you're connecting in from. Today is our 22nd episode, and I want you to see how we can start to maximize your employee performance through that culture, recruiting, and retention. I want to take a moment here. We've had a couple people who've already started joining in. Thank you for doing that. Let's see. We've got a LinkedIn user. We've got Janet McGillicuddy. We've got another LinkedIn user says live. Andre Bites, Janine, Janet again. And we've got a few others who are already joining. Thank you so much for joining in. Please tell us if you're joining in live or from the replay. Great. Let's get rolling here. I want to tell you a little bit about some of our panelists. So I'm going to introduce them first, give you a little bit of a background on who they are, and then maybe we'll do a quick check-in. First, I'm going to start with Erin Spencer. Erin is passionate about empowering teams and clients with the best knowledge and resources available to impact their business. She has a close to 20 years of progressive experience in human resources, strategic organizational development, and alignment, along with a host of operations experience in a variety of small and mid-sized businesses and nonprofits. A BBA from the University of Georgia, certified in human resources, has her SHRM CP and PHR. She is certified in both MBTI and DISC, and is currently the founder and CEO of Edgebrook Lane. She focuses on operations, business development, and organizational culture at Edgebrook. We're going to post a link in the comments here so you can find out a little bit more about Erin. But Erin, good to see you. It's been a while. How are you today? Excited?
Yeah, it's great to be here. I really appreciate it. I'm excited for us to discuss the topic and interact with everybody that's listening in today.
Yeah, I'm excited about all these many years of experience of you being in that space and kind of distilling all of that for us so people can start to understand how to do it better. Second, we have Joe Kozubowski. Joe is passionate about helping entrepreneurs run a better business and ultimately live a better life by helping them implement EOS, by giving them a complete system of simple, proven tools that allow owners to do three things he calls vision, traction, and being healthy, the health of the business. You can find out more about Joe in the link that we're going to drop into the comments section. Joe, how about you? How's the world looking for you today?
It's been great, Vinay. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate being part of the panel and excited about the topic as well. And just happy to be a part of it and hopefully be able to share a few nuggets that people can learn from.
I'm sure we will get plenty from you and your experience. I want to tell you a quick story, but before I tell you that story to get us really kicked off here on this topic, I'd love to hear from people in the audience. What piqued your interest when you saw this topic? You decided to click join and spend some of your time. What was it? What is it that piqued your interest? What was the thought that went through your mind? Please type that in the comments. I'd love to understand more and help us tune the dialogue here. So my first company was, I started when I was 17 years old. It was myself and my business partner, and we started doing electronic medical records way back when, quite a few years ago. Over time, we started to hire some employees. And as we did it, I spent so much time giving them the facts and what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to do it. This was as a 17-year-old. And it was tough enough for me just being a 17-year-old telling people who are maybe twice my age sometimes what to do. But I really didn't get them to really move very far. Lots of times people were kind of pushing back against me. I used to always blame it on the fact that I was 17, that people weren't listening to me when they were older. As I got older and was no longer 17, now in my 20s, now in my 30s, and I realized it had nothing to do with being a 17-year-old. It had everything to do with the fact that I wasn't building culture and building buy-in from my organization and from the people in my organization. And finally, the light bulb moment occurred to me where this is not about the numbers. It's about building the culture, recruiting the right people, and retaining those people who are really important to the organization's mission and efforts. That's how I went through my journey. It took more than a couple of years to get there. Erin, maybe I'll start with you. Does that ring true with any of the businesses that you've worked with in the past?
Well, I'm sure you know this. You're not alone. That's a normal response. I think so much of what we try to do is tell instead of, to your point, share, vision, mission. You talked about culture, obviously. So one of the first key things I think about is values. So what's important to you as an organization as you think about, the product or the service or the need that you're trying to fill. And then you find team members that live into that and believe that the same way that you do. And one way that we have found to be really effective over the years is that you think about interview questions that are tied to your values that in turn create buy-in to your organization. So your team knows what you stand for and they can get behind where you're trying to go. And then hopefully you're dealing with a little bit less of the telling them what to do. They're coming to you with ideas and suggestions to help you move your organization forward. So you're able to be focused on some different things, and they're bought in because they understand where you're going and what you want to do.
Joe, EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, you give a baseline sort of way to operate for companies, and I may not have done the greatest justice to that, but mission, core values, those all matter in creating that environment for a business to succeed, doesn't it?
It sure does. Yeah, actually, what EOS does, Vinay, is actually creates clarity around the vision and the core values, right? Which provides a foundation for a strong culture by aligning all employees with a shared purpose, right? And that's important. It also creates effective communication of core values, right? And that's really key. And the executives need to live those core values as well. They can't be aspirational, right? They have to basically live them and breathe them. It also creates a lot of discipline and accountability because at the end of the day, if employees can feel they contribute to a culture of achievement, they actually feel more engaged and more part of the organization. It also creates healthy conflict resolution. which promotes respect and resolution through, IDSing, which is a way of solving your problems. And the biggest thing for me is it also helps with employee development. As EOS companies grow, people can grow into better and bigger roles. It provides career advancement, and obviously that retention part. If you look at statistically, retention is a top priority because unemployment is so low, and it's just hard to find good people. So retention has to be a top priority for a lot of companies.
Yeah. So we've had a couple of people who chimed in with a couple of things. And Andre, thanks for joining us from London. I saw you. You mentioned that, and we've got Janet from North Carolina. And I'm going to try to. My name has been mispronounced 1,000 times for most of my life, so I'm going to say it's Yunta. L. I see. I don't know if that's correct pronunciation, but it says, I'd like to learn more about the best recruiting strategies. And I think this probably goes a little hand in hand with what we've already started talking about here. And I'd like to come back to that in a second. Janet also says, culture and performance are closely linked, but culture sometimes get overlooked. Famous quote I remember is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Right? Let's talk about the first one real quick, and we'll kind of start to transition here to some practical examples. That first one, Joe, I'll start with you. Best recruiting strategies. EOS, I mean, that's part of what it helps build a framework to do recruiting better. Is that a true statement?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And the idea behind it is that what we're going to do is, like Erin said, we're going to create questions that draw out the core values and make sure that they elicit the core values of the business and of the owners and what they want. And what that provides, though, is a great foundation to really get the same type of people in your organization that care about the same things. I look at retention as more of an engagement strategy, right? You want people engaged and they engage with a purpose. So the idea behind that is if you can create a purpose for them to engage with, they're actually going to be more willing to be part of that organization, perform better, want a longer tenure, all that kind of stuff that goes along with getting higher performance.
Analogy I make sometimes is this idea that a 300-watt light bulb is a very bright light bulb. A 300-watt laser has the same amount of power, but only one of them can actually burn through sheet steel, and that is the 300-watt laser. So if you can get everybody aligned, just like the laser does, you can focus and direct that energy in a very intentional way. Erin, did I say that right? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, and it does. And one of the things that you just mentioned is you talked about alignment. So I'm going to kind of take us back to maybe what you would call some basics or some things that you would hope that a lot of people are doing. But when you talk about recruitment, what we find more often than not is it's the feast or famine. You've had somebody leave, you've exponentially grown. And what do? We go and we tell everybody what we're looking for. But what we haven't stopped and done is gotten aligned as a team to figure out what are we looking for. Sometimes there's that conversation that needs to be had of what we've been doing in this role. Is it still successful? Should we continue to do things the same way? Should we think outside the box, push the envelope, look at it from a different way? Or is it, we need to go in a completely different direction? And what we find a lot within organizations is that there's not a collaborative effort to include internal and external stakeholders in that next hire. So what I mean by that is say you're looking for an account manager. Well, great. You go and get the hiring manager's perspective, but they're also interacting with a lot of other people internally and externally. Have you gotten feedback from them about the type of person that you need to be looking for? And that's really important when you talk about recruitment strategy, because you want everyone to ideally be looking for the same type of person, because it's going to help you align on what your mission and your vision is, because everyone on the team has the same concept of what that role should be doing within your organization. And a lot of times what we do is that we put our foot on the gas and we hit go. And more often than not, we just go and if it's an existing role, you rehire exactly like you did before. And we don't stop long enough to say, is this still working for us? Should we be doing something differently? And then also engaging other people in that conversation.
Yeah, that word alignment. kind of I've started to find over time should pervade through most everything that we do, right? There's not alignment, and we're 4 tires on a car driving in 4 different directions, and that car doesn't go very fast.
Hey, Vinay, can I weigh in on that? Because I think there's a couple
Please.
things too. Erin said one of the biggest things too is that having a clear and accurate job description, right? I think at the end of the day, if we can clearly articulate what the job is, and actually if it comes with a purpose, people buy into that a little bit more. And the other thing too is that a lot of people are looking for a career path, right? They're looking for something that allows advancement, right? So if you can clearly articulate where this position goes within the organization and that career path, that recruiting side is a lot easier when you can articulate that. It's not a dead end job. It's not something that's going to keep you grounded here forever. But advancement is so important for a lot of people, and they need to see that clear path. And what happens in a lot of recruiting side is that they tend to be a little bit more aspirational about their core values than they actually are. And I think the realistic side of it is that they have to be real with themselves. They can't espouse to be something they're not, because I think employees will pick up on that really fast.
So I want to transition a little bit here, because I think we made some really good points here, and I want to start to look at some practical examples here by sharing your screen. And I want to do that in response to what you said, Janet, about this idea of culture and performance are closely linked, but culture sometimes gets overlooked. I'd like to look at some visualizations that we've created for some companies based on data from the companies, so you can start to get a sense of what that culture looks like and what that recruiting and retention scenario looks like. Because I'll tell you, as a kid in school, you could write everything up on the whiteboard. I understood it, but until I actually got to physics class and got to crash 2 billiard balls into each other, or crash things into each other, or destroy something, or make something blow up in the chemistry lab, the light bulb didn't go off in my head. So I'm very much a visual person. So I'd like to hope that these visuals will help you understand as well what's happening in these organizations as well. Janine, do you think you can bring those slides up for us to take a look at? I do want to say one thing, is that this assessment that you're going to be seeing here is actually an assessment that anybody who is on this podcast will get completely for free. You can take the same assessment to see it for your organization. So if it's useful, you see some value in it, you like blowing stuff up in chemistry class, this is the business equivalent of it. So towards the tail end here, you'll see that. Let me tell you what you're seeing on screen here. This is what we call an empathy graph, and this is how we visualize what's happening in that culture around the people. You'll see some words around around this thing. It says driver behavior, efficiency, net promoter score. I'll tell you, those are metrics that companies have, and every single company is going to have its own set of metrics or key performance indicators or KPIs. That doesn't really matter so much, because it's the behavior of that company. What does matter is this blue and this dark gray in the middle. You see this A+, it says more effective. That blue dot is out at the far edge. So this particular employee is doing really well in this regard, is very effective in tech referring. You can see there's places where they're less effective, where their blue dot is just inside for the gray, from the gray. That means they're a little less effective than the average. And that's what that gray is. That dark gray is the average. So ideally, you want this graph to be completely covered in blue. But this diagram here, that blue area, shows you exactly how this employee is operating in that role and starts to give you a snapshot. This is the basis for how we're going to show you a little of some real life examples here. So do you mind going to that next slide for me, Janine? All right. So there's a bunch of KPIs for this industry. This is for sales for an organization, right? So we've got S for sales, and SA is service to account, active and service accounts. I don't want you to memorize this stuff. What we're simply showing you here is that you're going to see a bunch of KPIs. Your KPIs, what you measure people against in your organization, is going to be completely different. Doesn't matter. They're just abbreviations. They're just numbers. But what you're going to see on this next couple of screens here is how you see what's happening for the individual. On the left-hand side here, you see a chart. Most people look at Excel sheets or downloads, and they're trying to assess how this particular employee one is what this person's named as here. You're trying to assess on the left-hand side how they're doing from all these data and these metrics. It's hard to build culture. It's hard to figure out what your recruiting and retention is setting up to be from the left. But if we transition to the right here, you'll see a slightly different picture here. Can you go to that next slide for me? All right. So we'll see A&S up at the top here. CS, SR, SA, S. Those are how the salesperson is doing in this organization. S happens to be sales or sold accounts. SA is serviced accounts. SR is service revenue. A&S is actually having gotten that serviced account and actually gotten the monies from them. You can see they're doing really well. AD, if you can see that up around 2 o'clock, you can see that they're not doing so well in that regard. And what that basically tells you is that when they're selling this job, they're not selling it as high as most of the average people in this particular role. I want to stop there for a second, see if anybody's got some questions about that. Please feel free to type those into the comments, because Erin, Joe, I would love to hear what you're thinking. You see some of these acronyms or these abbreviations. We're seeing that this person is really good at selling accounts and getting the service revenue in for them as accounts, but they're a little scared to sell for so much money. And this is one particular type of role. It could be any role in a company. What do you all think? What's going through your mind as you see this?
Joe, do you want to go first?
No, go ahead, Erin.
Well, I mean, I think to your point, Vinay, it's looking at where the blue is lower. So to your point, I think it's the average disrupt. So to me, it's finding in and digging in as to what that metric means and why that is the way that it is. And it's the same thing for the PS percentage. Those are lower than the average. So to your point, they obviously are loving to sell, but something else is going on there. And the data is really showing you that you need to dig deeper and ask some questions and figure out what's going on there.
Joe, let me ask you a question here, kind of based on what Erin just said. I mean, this kind of gives you a sort of in my mind, this gives you sort of a roadmap for a discussion with this individual. Is that kind of the way you're thinking about it as well?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. This is the type of person who loves to sell, but doesn't see the value in the product that they're selling. So the question is it a value relationship, or is it a personal trait of theirs, a core value of their own that they basically want to help people without necessarily charging them a lot of money, right? So at the end of the day, does it boil down to a personal trait or a personal attribute that's contrary to the core value of the company wanting to make money, right?
Ginny, do we have this a little bit larger image of this that we can zoom in on so people can see that? Just for the graph area. There you go.
And it's also extremely interesting that the profit percentage isn't higher based on the volume of how much this person's selling too.
So let's use some of those insights that both of you just have. I mean, I think those are both fabulous insights. So now we get this holistic snapshot of this individual. We see how they compare to average. So they're clearly effective in some areas and less effective. They're less effective in certain areas. Does this shape? I mean, there's no one size fits all culture or conversation, right? Does this shift the conversation that you have with this person as a result of it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Joe, you want to go first this time? Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, so it absolutely changes obviously it identifies a training opportunity. It may be a value proposition opportunity. Obviously there's a number of things that are in the gray that are startling. You know, that would say, hey, this person is a great salesperson, but doesn't see the value in what they're selling as you know, from a deal flow perspective. You know, they love to sell. But obviously they don't sell at a price that's important to the success of the business. So
let me throw out an example of one company that we worked with. They were in the heating and air conditioning business. Being in North Carolina, heating and air conditioning is an important service. It gets hot down here sometimes. I remember a supervisor talking to a direct report or team member. Team member was kind of in a similar situation. They said, well, look, I feel like I'm just nickel and diming people all the time. He said, you know, we're not in the HVAC business. We're in the people comfort business. And the person said, what do you mean by that? He said, imagine living in a house when it's 100 degrees outside and you're trying to work from home. Can you imagine trying to work from home when your whole shirt is just soaked because it's so hot inside your house. He said, you're allowing that person to do work at home. Do you see how that has nothing to do with HVAC? Has everything to do with empowering and people to live their lives. And the person said, I never thought of it that way. And Joe, I think that's kind of what you're touching in on, right?
Yeah.
They don't see that larger purpose of what they're doing. That shifts how this person shows up to work tomorrow, right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Erin,
this is
what do
the
you?
type of person that would basically say, hey, you can make the fries on your own. You don't really need the fries. Go somewhere else and get them, and you can make them yourself from home, right? And that's kind of what I see with this is that it's, they're good at what they do. They just don't want to, sell the extras or sell the things that make that comfort, right? As you talk about.
Erin, were you about to say something?
Well, I just think it's to your point. The biggest thing is that when you're in misalignment like this in certain areas, and Joe touched on it too, this is like the flashing green light that's telling you to engage in a conversation with the employee. I mean, the data is there, something is going on. And when you see that metric or that data point, I mean, that's an opportunity between the supervisor and the employee to engage in a conversation. And then the other side of it is hopefully this isn't a shocker for the supervisor. They should have already been seeing this and knowing this information. It just validates some of what they're experiencing. And I think this is where the tough conversations come in. You talk about culture, like this is when you need to have those conversations. It helps guide where you need to start digging deeper.
So Janet there was I think Andre said, I may have to go. Will there be a reply? And I'm assuming that was a reply to Janet's question, because that's kind of how we started this. She said culture and performance are closely linked, but culture sometimes gets overlooked. We are looking at the performance here, right? But this gives us a capability to look into that culture piece. Care to comment on that, Joe or Erin, how this, by being able to see this, now you can intentionally shape culture? Is that true?
Well, I think it goes back to what we talked about originally, Vinay, is that you hire and obviously your core values become that guiding tenet to your hiring process, right? And at the end of the day, if you're asking the right questions in the hiring and recruiting process, you're going to draw some of this out in that process, as you go through that. So I think it's really effective just to ask the right questions based upon those core values, which then would elicit or understand if there's a deficiency or an issue there that doesn't align with what the goals of the company are.
So if I'm going to say that back to you, based in what Yunte had asked, she said they said they'd like to learn about the best recruiting strategies. You're saying the fact that this person doesn't believe in that purpose or see that purpose, that should have been vetted out by some of the questions you asked very early on in the process, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And again, you want people to be engaged. You want them to understand and be bought into the purpose. Because at the end of the day, if they don't want to come to work and they're not bought into it, you shouldn't, that's a recruiting red flag there, in my opinion.
Yeah. Let's try another one. Let's show somebody else, because I think different people give us different perspectives on what are possible here. Yeah. All right. So we got the graph on the right. You can skip to that next slide if you want. And let's take a look at the right-hand side again there, Janine. I think on they're probably the next slide after that. There you go. So we've actually got, you see that overall score is quite a bit higher here. I think the last one was like 65 or 67. This one's a 91. This person is doing well in so many dimensions, PS percentage, ACV, annual contract value, annual disrupt, their initial sale price. Those are the ones that they're really behind. Erin, Joe, what are you seeing here when you look at this as far as the person, the individual fit with the culture, so on and so forth?
Go ahead, Erin.
Now, my first thought is, more than half of what you're looking at, the blue is exceeding the gray, which basically means the employee's doing better than the average. So I first go to career development and advancement. Like, is this person challenged at all with what they're doing? There's obviously a standard and an expectation that's, depicted in the gray, but for most of what they're doing, they're blowing it out of the water, which is great. So I think that that's one observation. And then I think same as the other graph that we were just looking at, where they're not, why is that? And so, I mean, this one, again, this person very much obviously enjoys selling, is meeting a lot of those expectations. Their profit is doing really well. So they're obviously selling at the right price point. But some of those other things where they're lower, I think it's digging in and finding out what's going on there. And then the other thing that also comes to mind for me, they may not have the right goals for this particular individual, which ties back into their career advancement and development.
So if we were to put that into the context of what some of the comments that have come in already is, all of a sudden we're starting to say, if we want to, this person's already here, they're doing extremely well in this role. If we want to keep this person around, it's not, hey, there's no noise that's coming from this wheel, let's just go pay attention to something else. Actually, this person, if this is for 6 months, that might be okay. But if this is 3 years later, this is starting to become a problem. This person is kind of getting frustrated that they're hitting the glass ceiling every single day. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And I think it's the what's the old saying, the 80-20 rule. Well, I'm looking at it on the other side. I think a lot of times when we talk about performance, we focus on the ones that are maybe not meeting expectations. It is just as important, if not more important, to focus on your A+ people, to make sure that they're satisfied, engaged, you're meeting their expectations. Because let's be honest, when they're the ones that leave, those hurt even worse. So you're right. That's exactly it. It's focusing on those ones that are hitting it out of the park, and what are you doing to motivate and drive them?
So Janet says, and that emphasizes the importance of articulating what the company's purpose is when recruiting, rather than just asking job-specific questions during the interview. And I suspect, Joe, that might have been in response to some of what you were saying a little earlier. Thank you, Janet. And,
absolutely.
Commenting. Go ahead, Joe. You were going to say something.
And to echo what Erin said, is that it's extremely important that this person needs to be recognized for doing a great job, right? And they need to be called out. And the good thing there is that, when you look at a company that is rewarding people that are doing well, it also provides impetus to the people that may be struggling, right? To learn from the people that are doing well. So the goal there is that you want people to see what good looks like, and have them experience it, and kind of articulate it so they can learn from that person, or learn from what they're doing differently that could be coached up within the organization. So yeah, there's definite opportunities for development and growth. And certainly this person, I think at some point is probably going to get frustrated with their job and probably look to do something else, whether it's within the organization or outside.
Yeah, and what I encourage people to do is, when they see these kind of things, is, I mean, there's lots of reading between the lines that we're doing here, right? You can start to get we call these empathy graphs for a reason. You start to understand them a little more deeply once you see this. I mean, if I think about this person, I start to expand what is possible for them to do within this company. Maybe they become a trainer in certain areas, and maybe they move into a team lead sort of role. There's lots of options there. But imagine if this person is able to execute on the role. They feel like they can accomplish their job. They feel like they have the competence and the aptitude to do it. Now I give them more. I don't know how to endear your people to you any more than that. I mean, that seems like a person who's going to, at least for the next 3 years, I give them an option here. That person's not leaving. Erin, does that resonate with what you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we've got to engage in those conversations to find out what's going to motivate them and what is going to make them stay. And I think, we're looking at a sales example, so I'll use that one. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's not. I mean, to your point, Joe touched on, maybe they're interested in exploring some other things. Maybe they want to share their knowledge and be a sales trainer. Has anyone even asked the individual if that's something that they would be interested in? And I think a lot of what we do is, we talked about job descriptions earlier. Those absolutely serve a purpose, but people evolve and change. We don't like change, but there is that point with a lot of individuals that they do want something more. And I think if you don't ask those questions, folks don't always step up and tell you what they need. So you got to be able to ask. And this is a great way, when you look at something like this, compliment them on what they're doing, to Joe's point, reward them for their great performance, but ask them what else do they want to get out of this role, this company, this position? What are their aspirations?
Yeah, the pigtail of that too, Vinay, is that one of the things that a lot of companies struggle with is that they promote people that don't have the skills to do the job that they're being promoted to. And they think that they have that skill. And unfortunately, there's a lot of companies that do that in middle management, and they really need to train. Spend a lot more time and effort on development and training, because just because somebody can do the job doesn't necessarily mean that they can actually be a boss in that role, and be a performer as a boss and a leader. And I see that as one of the biggest issues in a lot of companies, is that they promote from within, which is great, but then they don't necessarily provide the training and the tools necessary to be successful in that new role. And I think that that's equally important to the long-term success of that employee. Again, getting back to performance, wanting to be in that role, the purpose, being satisfied in your job, and really wanting to be there, right? At the end of the day, if you were promoted and left on an island to figure it out, at some point you're going to get frustrated, and you may leave as a result of that, right? Because you just don't have the skill set and the support from the company to be successful in the new role.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you're saying there's, again, kind of back to that reading between the lines idea, right? When you're just looking at a spreadsheet, it's very difficult to kind of see this comparison of people and start to tell that deeper story. It's part of why we've used these graphs here so much, is because you can take a look at the snapshot of this person and say, gosh, I suspect this person is probably on the happier side as far as their role. They probably are gainfully employed, happy. They're probably even quite proud of what they do. But they wish I think to one of your points is they just wish someone would ask them, hey, do you have more in the gas tank? Because I think we're starting to see that you do. Gosh, what a way to get someone excited. I will tell you, as much as I love math and computer science, which is my background, I still can't see that in a spreadsheet. Right? Getting this deeper understanding of a person through these graphs here really tells you, kind of gives you that roadmap to conversation with them, right?
Absolutely.
We have LinkedIn user says, great point, Erin Spencer. It's as essential to engage with people who are going beyond expectations and not only focus on the ones who are not meeting expectations. I think that's a excellent point there. I'd love to just pause for a second. The topic of this is maximizing employee performance through culture, recruiting, and retention. I feel like we're starting to touch on all those different things in all the different ways, right? They're not three separate things. They're actually all completely interconnected in the way you have that conversation. I would love in the comments, I'd love to hear any from the audience. What are sort of the key nuggets or takeaways that you've heard so far that you'll go home and operate with now that you've heard it? I'd love to hear that in your comments. Janine, you think you can bring up one more example for us? Let's show a third example. Maybe we can do a little bit of compare and contrast between the three people that we've seen afterwards. Hey, Janine, I don't know if you hear me. I don't know if we have a screen share showed yet. Okay. Well, how about this? Let's do this. We've got these two. We've seen one that's doing really quite well in their role, but there's probably more room for them to grow. We saw that first person who's got some area, they're doing well overall, but they've got some areas. Talk to me about Erin or Joe. Talk to me about a sense of the culture. I mean, we've gotten a very limited snapshot here, just two examples, right? Talk to me about that culture. Do you feel like this is a culture that is going in the right direction, is being intentional? Or do you feel like there's some tuning that needs to occur? What are your gut sense so far, just by looking at that?
My initial thoughts is, obviously, as you all know, like, culture's made by the people that are part of the organization. And as those people come in to the organization or folks exit, that perspective changes. I think that the fact that both of the graphs that we've seen, that both of the individuals were very focused on sales and what was expected of them. Also wasn't on the farthest outside of the graph. I think a lot of times when you come into an organization or you look at someone that's sales focused, they want everybody all the time being at 100%, meeting every expectation. It looks like from both of these examples, what was represented in the gray is it was realistic and the employees were exceeding it. But it also begs the question, looks like they've got a lot of overachievers. So there's a chance that some of those sales goals may not be as high as they need to be, but the team isn't pushing back against that, which is a good thing from a culture perspective. It looks like they're producing, and accountability is something that's important.
So let me play that back to you, and Joe, I'd love to hear your comments on this, or perspective on this as well. So what I'm hearing from you is, gosh, this idea of productivity is a little bit of a scary topic for a lot of leaders these days, because I can't push harder, because if I push harder, I might just push people right out the door, right? Especially in this job environment. This is kind of what I've heard many times. I think what I'm hearing from you is, look, based on sort of the performance that we're seeing here, there may be more in the fuel tank for not just one individual, but maybe the whole team. There is something that's being left on the table. And if I were the leader of this company, that's kind of music to my ears, right? That's kind of what I'm wanting to see. And all I got to do is I got to go to them and say, hey, if I move that target up for you just a little bit, you think you could reach it? Joe, I'm kind of curious, what's going through your mind as you hear that? Is that the same thing you're thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, core values are a shared purpose for the company. And obviously these people are focused on sales, which is great, which is satisfying customers. And at the end of the day, the value of satisfying customers has a full circle benefit to the entire organization, right? Whether it be reviews, whether it be future business, whether it be just new customers coming as a result of that. So I think their emphasis and their core values are in the right spot. I think the question is, are they, like you said, Vinay, is there more in the tank that you can move the needle even higher?
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's part of the power of this, right? Is it gives you a sense of, am I just sticking my finger up in there trying to find out which direction the wind is blowing? But this gives you kind of quantitative proof that there is something there. So how do you have that conversation? I mean, so we've looked at two examples of people who are doing really well. Let's say we saw somebody who was below average on all these different dimensions. What kind of conversation do you have there? What kind of goes through your head if, let's just say, we see somebody and they're inside that gray area on all of them? What would you do then? How would you change your approach?
I think personally, I would look internally to make sure that we gave them the right skill set and the proper training to do their job effectively. That's the first thing that I would look at as a boss is to say, hey, did we give them a equal shot of being successful in the role that we put them in? And at the end of the day, that's something that should be scrutinized all the time. And then the question is, do they have the ability to do it, right? Did we make a bad hire? And that happens, right? At the end of the day, that does happen from time to time. And, if you look at the landscape of recruiting today, there's a less pool of people wanting jobs, right? Which then makes it harder to sell them on the job that they're going to get, which then means the recruiters are trying to work harder to recruit. They may not be saying the right things about what the job entails. So sometimes that misalignment can put somebody in a bad position of not being a good hire too. So I think that's the way I would look at it. One, do we train that person the right way? Do we have the proper things in place to make them successful and give them the tools? And then secondly, if that's not the case, if that's the case, then did we make a bad hire? Does a person just not have the skills to do it?
Erin?
No, I would agree with Joe. I'm actually doing something later this month, and one of the biggest topics of conversation is when you're growing and scaling a business, you're looking at, are we providing the training support resources that the person needs to do their job, or do we have to look at hiring external talent? And where that starts is, those are both business decisions. And at the end of the day, the business needs to have clear answers to those from the get-go. So I think it's really important. And then Vinay, you mentioned too, like one person that's below those expectations, I love to look at that holistically. Is that one person an individualized case? So you've got, I'm making this up, 10 sales reps that are killing it, and you've got one that's the anomaly? Or did we just happen to see the two that we just got showed are the only 2 out of the 10 that are hitting it out of the park? And I think that also helps answer the questions that Joe just brought up. If you've got 2 out of the 10 that are hitting it out of the park, maybe they've been there 10 years. They've had the training. They know what they're doing, and then you look at the other 8 and they've all been hired in the last 2 years. They've never had any kind of formal sales training. I'm making this up. The manager's new, hasn't had time to spend with them, hasn't really had those discussions. I think those are all the things that you need to be digging in on to understand a little bit more. And I think the other thing that a lot of companies don't do, and Janet touched on this in the comments, is it's great to look at those job specific questions, but it's also really good to look at what are your internal resources to support those people when you hire them and bring them in the door.
Yeah, I heard this fantastic quote. It said, "There's no such thing as bad teams or bad employees. There's only bad managers or bad leaders." This is what I think of all the time. I point a finger at somebody else. There's 3 fingers pointing back at me. So 75% of the time, the problem is with me, not somebody else. Is the way I think about that. And I think that's kind of what I'm hearing here.
Part of it too, Vinay, is when you go to the personal development side of it. We espouse this with EOS, is that you got to tell them a number of times, right? If you tell them once, they may not get it. On average, I think you have to tell somebody 7 times on how to do something for them to get it and then internalize and want to become part of it. So, at the end of the day, some managers don't have that skill set of understanding what it takes to train the proper way. And that's why I think Erin's point of that professional training and that professional development is extremely valuable to any organization that wants to succeed. Because putting people in roles just because they're a warm body is not a recipe for success long term.
So, Janine, I'd like you to put up on screen that offer that we had for everyone. If everyone is interested in those graphs and doing something like that for their own organization, we're doing that for free. Anybody who's part of this podcast, if you can share that screen with everyone. If you want to see if your employees are focused on track, we usually charge for an assessment for a 30-minute call to review it, and then we build a custom AI-based report that goes through and assesses all that. It's an employee satisfaction and retention assessment. It's a very, very quick assessment. It gives you same sort of results that you just saw there, but you can take it across a full team and start to find out who and what is the general level of morale within your company. Or is everybody happy? Are they engaged? Where are they engaged? Why are they engaged? And it gives you a snapshot into that. It tells you how to shape your conversation just like those graphs you just saw. If you're interested, you can go click on that QR code, or I think we'll put a link in the comments. There it is. The slide deck, which also has it as well. You can go directly to that link and fill that assessment out. It should take you about 3 to 5 minutes for any person who takes it. Ask us if you have any questions. We'll be more than happy to do it. Having these insights is so valuable as a leader to run your organization more effectively. Let's come back to you, Erin and Joe. We spent a lot of time talking about a bunch of different things around this idea of culture, recruiting, and retention. We're getting to about 10 minutes out. What would you say, Joe, I'll start with you. Based on kind of sort of how our kind of meandering conversation went here, what would you say are the top, 1, 2, 3 takeaways for someone to think about in terms of the recruiting, the retention, their culture, and how does EOS play into that?
I think the biggest key is be honest with yourself, know who you are, and use that to your advantage. A lot of companies want to be something they're not, and I think it just sends a bad signal to everybody. And I think the biggest thing that I tell my clients is be who you are. Be yourself. And if you can give people a purpose to want to be in your company, they'll want to come to work and they'll want to basically make you wildly successful in your business. And I think that's the key is really using that core values and making sure that they're pure core values to you, not aspirational, right? And at the end of the day, hire people that fit those core values. And if you can stay true to that, we have the right people, right seats. At the end of the day, you got to find the right people that fit your organization from a core value perspective. But at the same time, they have to have the unique ability to do the role that they're in. So that's the key: is the right people, right seats in our world is extremely valuable. And obviously having a clear identification as to what that role is extremely valuable to hiring that right person into that role.
I want to ask the audience, are there any key comments before I come to Erin? Any key comments or nuggets that you're going to take away from this conversation that you learned as a course of your spending your time here? Please type that into the comments so everyone else can enjoy that as well. Erin, how about yourself?
I think one of the things, and I'm not going to remember who says it, but there's a saying that says employees work for a leader and a cause. And I think if you don't identify what that cause is, they're not going to be engaged, which means your retention's going to go down. They're not going to understand where you're headed and where you're going. And I think Joe hit on something really, really important. I think a lot of us look at interview situations where we're trying to sell ourselves. Businesses are selling themselves. Employees are selling themselves. There's absolutely value in that, but you need to be authentic, because at the end of the day, if you try to be something that you're not, literally the second somebody sets foot in your door, they're going to be looking for their next job anyway. So what's the point? You save yourselves lots of time and money and really be who you are and live into those things. And I think the other thing that's important that we haven't talked about today either is who you were when you started your business and who you might be 10 years later may not be the same thing. Mm-hmm. And that also goes for your team, and it goes for your culture, and it goes for your values. And I think the other thing that I would kind of say as a kind of an ending thought is embrace that too. We talked about it before we all got on today. Change is hard, change is difficult, but change happens whether you want it to or not. And I think thinking through that and being aware of that is your organizations evolve and change is an extremely important thing. Because, who you start with when you start building your company and what you need 5 years down the road may not still be, I'll use the same word, in alignment anymore. And you got to embrace those things too.
Well, and on that note, though, Vinay, too, is that sometimes your employees won't have the skill set that you need to get to the next step. And, as I work with a lot of entrepreneurial leaders, as does Erin, is that don't feel bad about that. That's 9 out of 10 employees may not come along for the ride because they just don't have the skill set to grow into it. That's okay. The question is that most entrepreneurs, sometimes their loyalty comes into play, and their loyalty holds them back because their loyalty is putting a ceiling on where they can go based upon that person's ability. So I think it's equally important to recognize that, like Erin said, obviously we're looking at accountability charts every quarter just to make sure that it looks right and you got the right proper structure in place to be successful in what you want to accomplish and identify what's holding you back.
Well, I want to say thank you to a couple of different groups here because this kind of conversation does not happen without them. First and foremost, Janine, Prim, and Halal on my team. Ginny is the one who puts this whole thing together, and all the slides and all the coordination and the event itself on LinkedIn is all done by her. So if you actually like this, it's Janine who is responsible for most of that. The comments that you see, that's all from Prim and planning this whole episode at a higher level. That's what Halal has done for us. Thank you all for all your help in making this happen. The audience, we had really, really good comments here. We just got another one from Janet. Janet, I'm going to go ahead and read yours out. It says, key takeaway is the power of an honest assessment of the culture combined with data and candid conversations to optimize hiring and performance management. Absent that, hiring and evaluation are often too subjective, and an individual and firm performance suffers. These things are a must, not nice to have. Janet, I agree with that, right? Those are things that you got to shift in mindset. So thank you, Janet, and everyone else who spent some time listening in and commenting and making this a little more engaging of a discussion about a topic that I think is super important. Joe and Erin, thank you for the time and sharing all years of experience with running HR, thinking better about culture, implementing intentional culture, and implementing EOS for organizations who, all of which just helps them get to the next level of performance. Thank you for your time.
Well, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And if you would like that assessment, feel free to type in visual into the comments, and we'll get you a link so you can take it for yourself. Thank you, everyone. Till next time.